Thank you, Yael. So, despite the circumstances, I'm very excited to get an opportunity during the year to actually learn with everyone. And this learning is going to be a little bit different than we normally would do, because if you are not experienced learning via Zoom, there are some tools that make it really helpful when you can see things, and there are ways to communicate, and there are things that make it a little more difficult. So I have this set up as in a second here, I'm going to share my screen with some of the materials we're going to be looking at. If you are looking at your screen, you're welcome to follow along or volunteer to read or share your thoughts, etc. But don't feel obligated to. This is Lunch and Limud. If you want this to be, I just want to hear what Feivel's saying, and I'm going to sit back and relax and not say a word, by all means. But if you do have something to contribute, I highly recommend you raise your voice and let it be heard, so that everyone both on this call and anybody watching it later can also hear your insights. So there is a button in the bottom left corner that is mute or unmute. So I would recommend everyone keeps their speakers muted until you're ready to speak, should you decide to do so. Or if you want to raise your hand, I can call on you, if that's fine too. But don't wait for me to call on you. You can just jump in and speak. It's totally fine. I think that a lot of times at camp, there's an expectation when we talk about these Limud sessions that it's going to be some like nuanced learning, or apply it to camp, or it's going to be some complicated thing, a Gemara, and we're going to parse it really quickly. I wanted to throw all that out the window for this learning. I figure we're not at camp. We're not following those models. We just want to learn. We just want to learn something that I think could be fun, unrelated to the world around us right now, unless you choose to make it about the world around you right now, because Torah is always relevant. So rather than bringing in a daf of Gemara or something super complex that requires me to like really parse things out bit by bit, I figured we'd focus on a story that I think everyone is probably mostly familiar with. And I like to think of it as a story you thought you knew. My big topic for anyone that's learned with me one-on-one before is I love looking at Torah. And I don't mean Torah lowercase t, like whatever we talk about is Torah. I mean Torah, capital T, 5 books of Moses. Like, we overlook those sections because they're the stories we grew up with, and we want to get into the meaty, super academic, rabbinic things. But when we really go back and read it, it's very often that we find we didn't actually know the story as it's written. We knew it as it was taught to us as children. And one great example I'll give of this comes from Rabbi Elliot Dorff, my rabbi, the Rabbi Armara Da'atra of camp as well, who says he likes to go into day schools, and he asks the question, why can't Moses speak clearly? Why does Moses have a stutter? Does anybody have an answer that they learned to that? Why does Moses have a stutter? Anyone want to share? Come on, somebody's heard this.
Gabby,
what you got? Give us a story.
I don't fully remember, but I feel like what I heard was something about like when he was living in Egypt, that like they put 2 things in front of him to see if he was the prophet that they were like trying to like not have, and if like one was gold and one was like coal on fire, and if he touched the gold, then they would know that he was the prophet, and he like went for the other one and put it in his mouth and then burned his tongue.
Beautiful. Great. So it's the story of Moses choosing between gold and coal. And Moses is going to go touch the gold, but then the angel like comes down and smacks his hand over, and he touches the coal and it burns his fingers, and he sticks his fingers in his mouth, because that's what babies do. They stick their fingers in their mouths. And he burns his tongue, and now he's got to stutter forever. And what Rabbi Elliot asks once he gets that answer, because that's always the answer people give, he says, can anybody tell me where in our Torah that story is found? And these students who are day school students, I mean, these are kids who are actively learning Torah in the moment, are flipping through the book of Exodus for sure that it's in that text, that is in the Torah. And it's not. It's actually a midrash that comes way, way, way later, not in the Torah at all. We have no idea from the Torah itself, from the book of Exodus, why Moses is poor to speech. We just know that he is. And so there's a lot of stories like that in our text that we think we know them, But if we really look closely at the text, we'll find some really surprising things. So today, we're going to look at the third chapter of our entire Torah. That's it, Genesis chapter 3. And we probably won't even get through the entire chapter, but we'll start at the beginning of it, and we'll go through the story, and we'll see what we find. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here now. Can everybody see that? Yeah? Okay, good. I'm seeing some thumbs up. So I'm going to ask for volunteers to do some of the reading, but if nobody wants to, that's fine. I'll read it out loud as well. Is anybody interested, brave? They want to read some Hebrew, want to read some English? Any hands?
I can read.
All right, wonderful, Yardane. I would love for you to just start. This is chapter 3 of Genesis. Right at the beginning of the chapter, we're talking about the serpent. Would you prefer the Hebrew or the English, Yardane?
English.
Okay, go for it.
Now the serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild beasts that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you shall not eat any tree of the garden?"
Okay, I'm going to pause there. I'm going to pause you there. We're just going to go one verse at a time. So, "Vanachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh." The serpent was the shrewdest, the most cunning, the most guile. It's a funny word there. Mikol chayat hasadeh, of all of the wild beasts of the field. Now, right off the bat, why does this matter? Why do we have to know that the serpent is the most cunning, the most shrewd, the most guile? Does that teach us anything? Is that important information? Couldn't we just say the serpent was beguiling? He was shrewd? So I'm going to keep going. Feel free to jump in if anybody has thoughts on this, but you know, it seems superfluous, right? We have no real need to know this. Now I'm going to switch the screen share here for a second because I'm going to bring up one source that is always a really, really good source to look at whenever we've got questions, and that is Rashi. So what I'm sharing right now, if the screen share will work, there we go. Nope, that's not it. Where are we? Nope. Stop that share. Sorry, guys, technical difficulties here. There it is. So Rashi is a medieval French commentator who only cares about teaching the text as it is. And the website that I have up here is sefaria.org for anybody who's never seen this before. If you want to do some studying on your own at home during these times of social distancing, this is a great website to use to be able to look a little bit deeper into the texts and not just the face value, but also some of our commentaries. So over here on the right, Rashi is an educator. Rashi was a teacher in his time, and what he cared about was that you understood the literal words of the text and exactly what was going on. And so what he shares here in the second one, he says, Arum Mikol, shrewd, more shrewd than everyone. Rashi suggests this is corresponding with the subtleness, and his greatness was his downfall. More subtle than all, more cursed than all. And what we're going to see later on in this text that Rashi's already read ahead, Rashi knows this because Rashi's memorized this probably, is that in verse 14, we're going to see that when the snake is given his punishment, God says, you are going to be more cursed than all of the other creatures. Okay, so that makes sense. We've got some parallelism in language. The Torah is a beautiful poetic text. And so maybe we can learn from that what's going on. Maybe it's purely about linguistics, that God, we want to see this parallelism. We want to see that God, the serpent is the shrewdest of all, and therefore he gets the harshest punishment. But what's behind that? What's the implication of these sentences? Anybody have any thoughts so far?
I mean, I assume that it's probably just also setting us up for some sort of comparison. Like if somebody's the best of or the worst of, then like you're comparing it to the rest. So without like reading ahead, that maybe it's just supposed to be like a way of measurement for us to think about.
So I love that you're bringing up this measuring, because what's interesting is it's not going to explicitly measure this, but this notion that you're bringing up is exactly the implication that we don't really talk about very often. And that's what I find so fascinating. If the serpent is the shrewdest of all of them, it implies that at least some of them, if not most of them, are also shrewd, are also guiling, are also this negative connotation with this word arum, but we never see that quality in any of the other animals. So it makes you stop and think, well, what's going on? Now, another piece that we're going to see is this word arum. I'm going to highlight it here so you can see. It's it is ayin, resh, vav, mem. And the root arum, according to what is called the BDB, the Brown Dreyer Briggs Hebrew and English Lexicon, which is kind of the go-to resource for rabbinic scholarship, places this word in a very unique form. It says that this is one of the only places that this word appears in this context with this meaning of this word shrewd. But we are going to see a play on that word coming up here a little bit later. And so just something to keep in the back of our heads is, why are we learning about the shrewdness of the rest of the beasts? What is really going on here? Now, that's just the first half of the sentence. If we look at the second half of the sentence, we really are getting a very shrewd question. Did God really say, Af ki amar Elohim, is this what God said? Lo tochlu mikol eitz hagan, you're not allowed to eat from any of the trees in the garden? Anybody remember what God's command was? This would have been from chapter 2. We don't have it on the screen here. I know we've three chapters in. It's already like, wow, we need the context. But God does give a command about what the man and woman can and can't eat in the Garden of Eden, which is where we're set here. Anybody remember what it was?
They couldn't eat food or something. They couldn't eat any of the specific fruits of the garden, but they could Yeah, really close, really close. They could eat from any tree except for one in particular. The tree that they couldn't eat from was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is also a really weird name for a tree. Just syntactically, how it's named is very bizarre. And we could totally just have an hour on that one verse, but we're not going to do that. So it's the tree that is in the middle of the garden.
Do they say, do they acknowledge where that tree is? Because they likely don't have names of this is the tree of good and evil. This is the tree of apples.
Great question. Two things I'm going to say to that. Gabby, if I told you to go to the buddy trees, do you know which trees I'm talking about? Right. So we do have, even innately, when there is a repetitious thing to know about a geographic location, we tend to know where those are, even just from context, right? We've seen it before, we've declared it before, and the more important it is to you, the more you're going to know it's there. So on the one hand, we can look at it as like the buddy trees. If you are told there's exactly one tree that you're not allowed to eat from, chances are you're going to probably make sure to know which one that is. More than that, though, we are told in chapter 2 that it is the very center of the garden. So presumably it looks different. Maybe it has a halo around it. I don't know. But it's presumably in the middle of the garden. We assume they know which one it is, but it's a really good question. But if we look at the way the serpent is asking this question, you'd think that the question would be something along the lines of, didn't God say you can eat any of the trees? Because that's the command. You can eat from any of the trees except for one. So you can eat from any of the trees. If I'm being shrewd, if I'm trying to be a little manipulative, as we give the serpent credit for being, wouldn't I phrase it a little different? Didn't God say you can eat from any of the trees? Let's eat from the trees. But the serpent doesn't. He says, did God say you can't eat any tree? It already puts us off. It already puts the woman, as it's translated, ha'isha. We don't have the name Eve here yet. That actually comes a little bit later. That's why the translation that you're seeing says the woman. It's not derogatory. It's just a literal of ha'isha, the woman. There's only one, so it shouldn't be too confusing at this point. And so the woman replies very differently. Yardane, you want to read that next sentence for us? Did I catch you mid-bite? Sorry.
Yeah. The woman replied to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the other trees of the garden."
Go one more for me.
"It is only about fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, 'You shall not eat of it or touch it, lest you die.'"
Amazing. Okay, now here's the really cool thing, and Rashi's going to point this out as well, but we don't even need Rashi for this one. We would have to go back to chapter 2 to see exactly the wording that God gives, so you'll have to just trust me for now on what the wording is. God says, don't eat it. But the woman says, "Lo tochlu mimenu velo tig'u bo," and don't touch it, pen temutun. She adds this extra thing. Now, that seems unimportant, right? It seems like just another one of these fences around the Torah, right? You're told not to touch the hot stove, so you don't turn on the hot stove. You don't go near the hot stove. You add that layer of protection away from it. So she says, listen, God said don't touch it, or don't eat from it, don't even touch it, or you're going to die. Now, I want to think about that for a second, because we're going to see something really interesting. Now, God does say, mot yumat, if you eat from this, you will die. That's what God says. And the serpent is about to respond. Can I get a new reader? Anybody else want to participate in the reading here? We'll scroll down.
I can go. Oh,
all right.
Where are we?
We are on verse 4. It's now at the top of the screen share, right here.
"And the serpent said to the woman, 'You are not going to die, but God knows that as soon as you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like divine beings who know good and bad.'"
Great. Let's pause there. Okay. So, right? God, the serpent says, listen, you're not going to die. Period. You're not. Now, I actually want to back up for just 1 second because I missed one other really cool piece. Oh, sorry. I hope that didn't pop up on the video, my little email notification. So I do also want to point up one other bit of language that we can't see in the English that we can see in the Hebrew. When the woman responds, it's only of the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden. You shall not eat of it or touch it lest you die. She says, "B'toch hagan amar Elohim lo tochlu mimenu velo tig'u." It's in the plural. So it would be a little bit more accurate if we had said, and I'll edit it here, "Y'all shall not eat of it," or "Y'all shall not touch it, lest you die." That's right, got to represent the South now that I'm living in Louisiana. All right, but this plural second person is what's happening in the Hebrew. So it's not just that the serpent is talking to the woman. Very often we give credit for the sin, the quote-unquote sin, the bad action, to Eve and Eve alone. And we think that Eve, this woman, is the one who does all the bad things. We're going to look at that in a second, whether that's true. But surely she understands that this is a command given to both of them. Furthermore, the command that is given directly is to the man. And now it's the man and God are having the conversation, and then the woman and the serpent are having a conversation, which really makes us beg the question, like, what's going on in this game of telephone that God said to the man said to the woman clearly understood the man because she's saying it here, but added this piece of also don't touch it, and then the serpent's coming in and asking this weird manipulative question. It's a very bizarre conversation that's taking place here. But what Rashi points out, and I'm not going to switch the screen back and forth, but if you want to go to sefaria.org and look at chapter 3 on verse number 4, Rashi points out a really cool thing about the language. And in verse 4, the Vayomer Nachash el Haisha lo mot temutun. You will not die, point blank. But what does the not dying refer to? If we look linguistically at the structure of the sentence, we see the woman say, God said, don't eat it, and if you touch it, you will die. Right? If we rearrange our commas. So the death piece is actually being applied to the touching of the fruit, even more so than the eating, right? Like if you're going to touch something and it kills you, obviously if you eat it, it'll kill you. But it's not just that if you eat it, it'll kill you. It's even the touching point. So what Rashi points out and adds from Midrash Rabbah, I believe, is that what happens behind the scenes, what's not in the text here, is that the first thing the serpent gets the woman to do is not eat the fruit, it's touch the fruit. Now, if you've touched the fruit and you've been convinced to do that, and you find out, wow, I'm still alive, now the serpent's got you. Because you thought that what you were told was true, and you were told don't touch it or you'll die. So now you've opened the door to the question of, well, what else was I told that may or may not be true? And so at this point, we go into verse 5, and the serpent says, even further, he says, look, you touched it, you didn't die. Now let me explain to you why God also lied about the eating of the fruit. And what he says here in verse 5, as was just read, Ki yodea Elohim ki bayom achalchem mimenu v'nifkechu einechem. In the day that you eat this fruit, your eyes will be opened. Nifkechu, to be opened. V'hayitem kelohim. You will be like the divine beings, like the Elohim. Yodei tov vara. And you'll know good from bad. Good from evil, tov vara, which is, well, aptly named the tree, right? If it's the tree of the good, of the knowledge of good and evil, it doesn't seem like a big stretch for the serpent to be like, well, yeah, okay, it's good and evil, so that's what it's going to do. But here's the cool thing. Well, actually, we're going to come back to that in just one second, because now we have the action. Now we have the setup, and now we've got what's actually going to take place in this chapter, the big scary thing. Vatera ha'isha, verse 6. Anna, could I have you continue reading?
Feivel, can
Yes.
I just ask a question before we continue forward?
Yes, please do.
Just a question about then, how did that inference of then the touching, because I know we've probably all learned in the past of that, the reason that you aren't supposed to touch it is for temptation. But how did that inference of touch become part of it? And how did the serpent know that that was going to be an inference to then hook her in? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So Rashi, again, doesn't go into a lot of the details of behind the scenes stuff because he's only interested in enlightening you on the text itself. So for that full story of how did the snake go there and how did we get to that inference, we have to go back and look at the Midrashim, which I have not done in depth for that particular question. But what Rashi's doing, the way they're able to pick up on these questions is purely linguistic. The rabbis and our sages love playing with words. They love it. It's like their favorite game of all time is wordplay. And so what they do is they notice the structure of what's being said. It didn't say, what it did not say. In verse 3, it says, Lo tochlu mimenu v'lo tigobo, right? You shall not eat from it, comma, and... So in the English here, it's translated as or. But the vav over here we can see in the word vilo, is also an and. So they break up the sentence. They say, and actually that's also helped, by the way, by the tropes, though, which is this zakef gaton, these two dots above the word, indicates like a comma. That's Torah punctuation. So what Rashi does and what the sages are doing is they're saying, look, there's a comma here. God said, don't eat from it, full stop. And God said, second statement, full statement, irrelevant to the first part, if you touch it, you will die. And so what Rashi's picking up on is it could have said the other way around. It could have said, lo tig obo, don't touch it, and if you eat of it, you will die. That would be a normal way of explaining somebody an order of operations of not doing something. Like, don't even touch it, because if you eat it, you will die. But that's not what the woman says. She flips it. And because it's flipped like that, it opens the door to the rabbinic interpretation of being able to say she understood this one piece. And because she understood, if you touch it, you'll die, and the snake knows better, the snake presumably has touched it himself, he's just shrewd, he's been paying attention, whatever reason the snake knows, because he knows that that's not true, and he's cunning, right? We know he's the most cunning of all. It opens the door for him to say, aha, she made a claim that I know is categorically false, and so I'm going to call her on that claim first and then push it forward. It's a really great debate technique, actually, and we'll see this all over the world when people argue with one another about things. It's you don't attack the issue at play, you attack the one false sentence. Right? I think that Ramah is the greatest camp in the world because we have chocolate muffins on Shabbat. Or sorry, because we have chocolate muffins on Friday. But you don't have chocolate muffins on Friday. Therefore, it's not the greatest camp in the world. And it's like, well, hold on. That's not really, right? Like you focused on the wrong part here. And so that's kind of what we're seeing going on with the snake. Yeah, I see a hand from Gabby over there.
Another question. So presumably before she touched it, ate it, any of this, she doesn't know the difference between good and bad. And therefore, couldn't you argue that like, how could she actually know whether to touch it or not? Because she doesn't actually know what's good or bad. She's just like regurgitating information. And then like, how can, like, you know what I'm saying?
I do. So if I'm hearing you right, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like what you're asking is, how can we really be responsible for our actions if we really truly don't know right from wrong, right?
Right. Well, not necessarily we, because like we do know what's right from wrong, but like in this situation, before she touches it, like obviously she's not going to know because she doesn't know good from evil.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying?
And I'll push it even one step further for you, Gabby, and I'll point out, how does the serpent seem to know?
Right. Like, obviously he does have the knowledge and therefore likely already ate it and like, therefore is bad.
I love it. So I'm going to point us right back to verse number 1 here in that phrase, that weird phrase we brought up initially that Rashi pawned off as linguistic. But arum mikol chayat hasadeh. The serpent is the shrewdest of all, implying that the rest of the creatures have some element of shrewdness within them. They have some capability. There is some notion, and presumably people would fall into that same category. There's some element of knowing what's going on because God said, don't do that. And there's got to be some mention of some notion of, I understand what no is for this. And I might even equate that, as I live now here with 2 dogs that destroy my entire house, leave the house, but are perfect angels when we're home, right? I might even equate it to that level of knowledge. If they see me get upset at something they're about to do, they know better. But the second I walk away and leave the house, it's as though I never said anything. And it's just, let's go to town on the trash can and rip up the couch every time. And if you guys would like to see some really funny videos of that happening, I'm happy to send those after this class. So there is something going on, but I think your question is really going to be relevant when we see what happens as a result of these actions. Because God is going to punish the snake, the woman, and the man. And at that point, I think it'll be really relevant to ask that question, does the punishment fit the crime, given that they hadn't eaten from this yet? The knowledge they had was not there yet. So let's hold on to that question, and hopefully we can get to that pretty soon here. Other questions before we move on? Okay. So now the woman, according to Rashi, has been convinced that touching it will not kill her. And so now she's going to start making observations. And again, back to your question, Gabby, of how much can we really observe without knowledge? And yet we're going to see something pretty significant in what the woman, says the Torah, is able to deduce from the information she has in front of her. Anna, would you do us the honor of one more verse?
Sure.
We're at the top now, verse 6. When the woman
saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable as a source of wisdom, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband, and he ate.
Okay, so let's pause there. Latera Haisha, she saw in very clearly several things. Ki tov ha'etz lem'achal, that the tree is good for eating. It's got good food, right? It is fruit, just like all the other trees have fruit. It's fruit. Great. V'chi ta'avahu le'einayim, and it's a delight to the eyes. It's a pretty fruit. It's enticing. Any of us ever have the experience where we see, and God, I hope we have this experience, because otherwise what are we all Instagramming our food about? But we see a plate that's made and you just go, oh my gosh, my mouth is watering. That looks so good, right? We have this animalistic understanding of something that looks delicious. Sometimes it's based off of past experience, like we've eaten it before and we know it's delicious. That must be the case for like all shellfish for our non-Jewish, non-kosher friends, because I don't know who ever looks at a lobster and goes, that looks delicious. That being said, clearly there's some element of understanding there. And then there's also the non-experience-based foods, right? There's just something you look at for the very first time, and we see this in our children, and they want to eat it. They want to put it in their mouth. There's something enticing about it visually. So she sees those things. And then here's an interesting one. V'nechmad ha'etz lehaskil. It's nice, nechmad, desirable is the English here, but it's nice as they translate this as a source of wisdom. The tree is for knowledge. She already knew that. She already knew that from the name of the tree, and now she's getting it reinforced by the snake. But she's able to maintain that understanding. She's able to actually realize that, there's something about this tree. And so what does she do? V'tikach mipiryo vatochal. And she takes of its fruit and she eats. Now, at this point, the story has been taught to our children. Who's done the wrong thing? Anyone? Who's done the bad thing? I think I saw Gabby mouth Eve, right? The woman. The woman has done the bad thing. Shame on her. All women are evil, right? That's how that progresses there, right? And yet, Vatitain gam leisha, and she gave also to her man, meaning the man that was with her, but then ima, who was with her, vayochal. Who's at fault here? We're told the woman did the bad thing. She took the fruit, she ate it, she went over and enticed her husband to eat it. But what's actually happening here, according to this text?
Well, like he didn't stop her from doing it.
How often do we teach children, if you are a bystander, you are at fault, right? He's standing right there. He's hearing the whole conversation. He's not correcting her statement that touching it is bad, right? Probably because he's the one that taught her that touching it is bad. He's hearing the language being used as in the plural. God told us that we should not eat it. And then he's watching her take the fruit and eat it, all while she's there, all standing right next to her. So it seems as though there's a little bit more blame to go around than we're initially taught this story. And the reason we're taught this story, the way that we're taught, is because of how they are going to then play out the scenario with their conversation with God. Can I get a new reader? Verse 7. Molly.
Yes. Okay. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they perceived that they were naked, and they sewed together fig leaves and made themselves loincloths.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there because we got some fun wordplay going on right here. Vatipakachna einei shnehem, and their eyes were opened, which is exactly what the snake said would happen, using the same language, meaning they were enlightened, they were paying attention. V'yedu ki eru mimhem. Anybody hear a word in there that sounded similar to something we heard earlier? Ki eru mimhem. They were a room. Now, according to the BDB, which is this lovely lexicon of Hebrew and English. And I can see Rabbi Matt right over there shaking his head like, this is from a different root word. This is from the root of the word or, meaning skin, right? So they were a Rome, meaning their flesh was there. Their skin was present, meaning naked. But Rashi asks a really interesting question. Rashi says, hold on. Even a blind person knows that he's naked, right? It doesn't require eyesight to know that you're naked. What does it mean that all of a sudden they knew that they were naked? And so he takes it that step forward and he says what this means, back to Gabby's question, is that they now had shame. But not shame of their physical bodies, as is implied by the rest of this sentence. They were ashamed of their nakedness, and so they got dressed. But Rashi says they were ashamed because now they understood what they did. Right? They were naked in the sense of they were emotionally exposed. Oh my gosh, look at what I've done. And this is going to play out. We're going to see this in their following actions. Molly, can you continue for us?
Yes. They heard the sound of the Lord God moving about in the garden at the breezy time of day, and the man and his wife hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Okay.
So, sorry, I forgot to one step because I forgot to explicitly state the linguistic connection here. Arum, this word for nakedness, is spelled almost identically to the word arom, that word for cunning that the serpent is attributed of being. So we have this wordplay going on of the serpent is shrewd, and now the people are naked. They have shame. So there's some kind of connection here between the words. Now, from a purely grammatical standpoint, these are seen as two different roots. They're not the same word, but there's definitely some auditory play going on here, especially when we remember the Torah was not always studied from the text, right? Most people learned Torah and studied Torah orally. They heard what was going on. So anytime we hear words that sound similar, our rabbinic ears have to perk up and we have to ask, okay, what's going on there? So this next sentence, Vayishmu et kol Adonai Elohim. This is one that people love to sit on because this is the first explicit allegory that we must be having. They heard et kol Adonai Elohim, the voice of God, mithalech bagan, walking in the garden. Voices don't voices don't walk. And so we would translate this in the way that is here as they heard the sound of the Lord God moving about in the garden. And they translate it as the sound of God, which is moving. The sound is moving. But the literal is the voice of God is walking. So we kind of have to sit here and go, well, what's really going on with that? I don't really want to dive too much into that verse itself. But suffice it to say that this is where we can start to look at Torah and saying maybe there's something deeper than literal in every single sentence, right? Voices don't walk, and therefore there's something else going on here, which is where you get to the translation that you see in the English here that was just read. At the breezy time of day, anybody want to guess when that is? Also, why is that important? Who cares what time of day it was? Any thoughts? I'm going to take a bite of my lunch because it's lunch in Limud. No thoughts? That's all right. We can move past it. Rashi
it's like the nice summary, like the breezy time, like maybe it's like an afternoon type thing. Like, I don't know. It seems like it's very pleasant.
Okay, so there's something going on. Maybe it's just setting the mood. It's just setting the tone, right? It's just literary in that sense. And that might play out when we start looking at things like the voice of God was walking, right? There seems to be some kind of fun linguistic literary things going on here. Now, the sages are not going to like that because they want to believe that every single word has real intention and purpose in this entire Torah. So maybe it's purely literary. Rashi, through I believe one of the books of Midrash, maybe Genesis Rabbah, translates Ruach Hayom as being directional. It's the direction that the wind blows when the sun is in the sky. And because the sun goes from east to west, it means the sun is in the western sphere. And then they get to, it's the 10th hour of the day. Somewhere in the cool, fun Rabbi math. Happy to send links for the weird Rabbi math sections. But just a word of caution to all those that are watching this later. Never trust numbers from the rabbis. They were not mathematicians. I should be very clear about that. But it's the evening part, or sorry, it's the 10th hour of the day. It's like the late morning. It's the breezy time of the day. There's something going on here. I don't know. Maybe they're just cold. It's windy. Maybe that's why they had to wear the loincloths. They needed the clothes because they realized they were cold. I don't know. We're not going to get too far into it. But it's one of these pieces that when we learn this story, we gloss over. We don't sit with it. We don't get our, 7th grade B'nai Mitzvah teacher to be like, let's look at how it was the breezy time of the day when all of this was taking place. And so for me, I want to ask, why not? There must be something here. What's going on? And that can be a source for looking farther in depth whenever you're studying. And this is really accessible information, even when we're just at home on our own without a rabbi teaching, because we have online resources. We have places like Sefaria. I'm happy to be a resource for more in-depth analyses of any of these kinds of texts. And I encourage you to look more into these weird parts. I hope if nothing else happens today, I've inspired you to find one piece and one question that you had out of this and let it gnaw at you and figure out, I got to learn more about that one weird thing that's going on in the Torah. But we'll continue with our story because, and I'm just going to read here quickly for the sake of time, I want to get to their punishments. Vayikra Adonai Elohim el ha'adam vayomer lo ayeka. So they're hiding. And they're hiding, and that shows us, again, that sense of shame. That backs up Rashi's support of this nakedness being shame of action rather than shame of body, because they're hiding. They hear God coming, and they duck. They're like, oh gosh, God can't see us. Vayomer lo ayeka. And God says to the person, Ayeka, where are you? Where are you? Now, of course, God must know where they are. God knows everything. God sees everything. God is created the garden. There's no hiding spots that God doesn't know about inside the garden. He literally built the place. She literally built the place. It literally built the place. God literally built the place. And so, this is purely a conversation starter, says Rashi, in the same way that when we have the Cain and Abel story, God asks, where's your brother? And in the same way later on in other stories, we have similar examples where God always opens the conversation with some kind of question, similar to how we today might say, hey, how's it going? When that's not really what we care about. We don't really care to the answer to that question. Not that we don't care about how you are doing, but that's not the point of the question, is for that one question. The point is to get beyond it, to open up the conversation. But here, something interesting happens, because the man here, Adam, actually admits something. He openly admits something, which is going to make it really strange what happens next. Vayomer et kolcha shamati bagan. I heard your voice in the garden. Va'ira ki erom anochi. And I was afraid because I was, and I'm going to translate it here, ashamed. Va'echave. And now he's admitted this. He says, I feel shame. I feel like I've done something wrong. Vayomer mihi gid lecha ki erom ata. Who told you that you? I'm translating our conversation as, who told you that you've done something worth being ashamed of? Who told you that you've done wrong? Hamin ha'etz asher tziviticha levilti achal mimenu achalta. Did you eat from that one standalone tree that I forbade you from eating? That's the only thing that Adam could possibly be ashamed of doing. It's the only negative commandment he was given. Don't do this one thing. And so here he is coming forward and saying, I'm ashamed. And God says, whether or not God knew, we can have that conversation in and of itself, right? Because does God know everything immediately? And maybe God already knew, and maybe this was a trap. But also, maybe this really is deduction, right? There's only one thing I told you not to do. It must be the thing that you did if you're feeling ashamed. Not to mention that I know that if you did that thing, you'd actually understand what shame is. Gabby, I see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
But couldn't you argue also that, like, he ate from the tree, God's like, where are you? Knowing that Adam now knows good from evil, he could have lied and been like, I don't know, I'm right here, what's up, God? But he chooses to be good and tell the truth. And shouldn't that lessen the punishment?
Great. So now we're starting to see the train of thought that I think is really, really interesting when we start looking at punishment. We have to weigh what happened and what's going on with the punishment that's given. So let's look at that punishment and say, well, hold on, what happened here? Because yes, let's assume for a moment Adam gets some brownie points for admitting this. But let's see what he does now. Vayomer ha'adam ha'isha asher natata imadihi natnali min ha'etz va'ochel. Hey God, the woman that you put at my side, she gave me the fruit, so I ate it. What was I supposed to do? So Gabby, now I'm going to push it back to you. How awesome was his honesty up front? What turn just took?
Okay, good point. But my other question is, why is he the one responding first? Why, like, prior to this, the whole conversation was like the woman and the woman going to the tree, the woman eating the tree, and then bringing it to Adam, and then all of a sudden, like, where are you? And the woman doesn't say anything, and it's just the guy talking.
Yeah, so really interesting question here, which I don't think we're going to have time to really explore deeply. I might ask the question, so if the question for, just to rephrase it is, why all of a sudden is this back to God and man when we just had serpent and woman? I do want to point out, though, that in chapter 2, when these commands are initially coming down, it's also between God and man. So maybe there's some kind of parallelism of these are the people that were the lawmakers, and so they're the ones having the conversation. But we could definitely get more into that. But yeah, so Adam is really sidestepping blame here. Not only is he putting it on the woman who we all saw earlier, he could have stopped her at any point in time. He was right there when it happened. So not only is he putting it on her, but he's even putting it back on God. Right? You put the woman at my side, God. You tempted me. It's your fault. Now, we have a commandment later on in the Torah that says don't put a stumbling block before the blind. Maybe God is at fault for even putting a tree that can tempt them. Adam doesn't seem to say, you put the tree there. He says, you put the woman there. He's really throwing her under the bus there. Now, interestingly enough, God just takes it at face value and moves down the chain, right? Which is a really interesting commentary on how we deal with punishment when we're accusing someone of something, right? God doesn't challenge Adam in the way that I just did and say, hold on a second, you were right there, I know this. He actually takes Adam's words face value and moves on down the chain. Vayomer Adonai Elohim la'isha mazot asita vatomer ha'isha hanachash hishiani va'ochel. But the woman does it too. The Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? And she doesn't defend herself. She doesn't say, whoa. Adam could have stopped me at any point in time. Aren't you guys the one that made these rules? What is going on here? Instead, she passes the buck too. The serpent fooled me. I didn't do anything wrong. It was the serpent. And then God continues and goes on to cursing the serpent. There's our parallelism we talked about earlier. You are more cursed than all of the other animals. Also weird, implies all the other animals are cursed in some way. We'll just let that sit for a minute because we're going to have to close here pretty soon. But what I want to take away from this interaction is I want to ask the question, what is the punishment really for? We're taught the story as Adam ate from the tree she's not allowed to eat from and got punished. But if we look at the punishment that's taking, the transaction that's taking place when God is deciding what to do, God first gives Adam a chance to come clean. Adam only takes a little bit of it. He says, did you do this thing? That I know you did, but did you do this thing? Adam says, well, I didn't. I was, I'm passing the buck. Then God gives the woman a chance to do the same thing, to say, listen, is this what you did? In fact, ma zot asit. That's the words. What is this that you did? We hear that as accusatory, right? We hear that as God saying, I know what you did. I can't believe you did this, right? That same sort of dog analogy. Look at what you did, right? You stick the dog's nose in the trash that he tore up, even though that doesn't really work in terms of punishment. But we all know that we can all imagine it. And look at what you did. But maybe we should translate this with a question mark and not an exclamation point. Maybe it's God saying, Ma zot asita. What did you do? Did you do what Adam is accusing you of? But she too misses her chance to come clean. She too misses her chance to take responsibility. She too passes the buck. It's only the snake that doesn't get to defend himself. God doesn't ask the snake, Ma asita. God says, Ki asita zot. I know what you did. And because you did this, no question asked, which also begs the question, what's really going on in this relationship between God and the serpent? Again, not really here in the shot of the text, the literal of the text, but something that I find really interesting. So this text continues. We're going to have to call it because we're just about out of time here. But I hope that what you got out of this is not only that you got a chance to see some text that you thought you knew, and you got a chance to see some Sepharia and some sources and some ways to learn this on your own. But hopefully you have also been inspired to actually go back and read some of the more popular stories from the Torah that you thought you were told as a kid, and look a little more deeply at it now that you're a little bit older, a little bit wiser, and can look at this with a little bit of a deeper eye. So I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for learning with me. Chapter 3 of Genesis, or the first half of chapter 3 of Genesis, I find it fascinating. I just think the Torah has so much to give us. And there's a reason that we reread the entire Torah every single year. If it were simple, we definitely wouldn't do that. So again, thank you all. And thanks to Ramah for giving me the opportunity for this lunch and limud. I'm going to finish my lunch. If you guys haven't finished yours, I encourage you to do that as well. And if it's 4 o'clock for you, start making dinner.
We're so happy that you are kicking us off for our Yeshli Kama Hodaot. And for those of you who are still on this call, thank you for joining, and please stay tuned for all of the other things that will be happening, mini gatherings. We're going to be having a Tzevet Oneg on Friday. We're going to be having a camp-wide Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday as well. Would love to see you all there. If you have any ideas of other things you want to see, more limuds with Feivel or other people, texts you want to explore, if you're talking to people and they share things, please pass along our way. Our goal really in these next few weeks is to create content and gatherings that are relatable to what you guys want and how we can kind of build our community and stay connected while we are from the comfort of our own home.
I also just want to add one quick thing. If anybody either on this call or watching this video later would like to do a little bit more learning in Chevruta or have a question about a particular text, feel free to reach out, Feivel@ramah.org, Feivel @ramah.org. And I'm more than happy to do some learning one-on-one in small groups via these types of Zoom shares, whatever we feel we need in these difficult times.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Yeah. Oh, and Josh tomorrow. Come join us.
Shout out Yarden.
Ain't no party like a Yardy party.
I'll be there.
It's going to be wild on Zoom. Will meets and eaters be on their kitchen tables? Maybe.
I hope so.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.